Hi everybody! Today I want to talk to you about making shoulder straps for your upcycled clothing. There is the traditional method of making straps that you will find if you are following a pattern, but if you're like me and you don't like following a pattern or you like making upcycled clothing, then you're going to have to come up with your own way to make straps. So I have a few different methods that I use when I'm making clothing. And I do have several tutorials on my Etsy shop that on garments that require straps. So I just thought it would be helpful to do a little video explaining the methods that I use. So let's do it. Okay, the first method that I'm going to show you is by using a shirt sleeve, a short sleeve from a men's shirt. This is just a sleeve that's been cut off of a men's shirt. And this is so easy. All we're going to do is we're just going to cut the hem off of this sleeve and use it as our strap. So that's all you do really. You just start right here. Make sure that you can go ahead and you can cut at the seam to cut it in half. It might make it a little easier to cut. So we'll just go ahead and open our sleeve up like that. And then you're just going to cut right along the edge, making sure that you're not cutting on the stitching. You're cutting on the outside here of the stitching. You want to leave that stitching intact because that's going to help hold your strap together. You don't want to cut the seam. So you just cut along here. And then you're just going to sew that with a zigzag stitch. Okay, so I have the hem cut off of the sleeve, and I'm just going to place it underneath the presser foot so that the edge of the fabric is about in the middle of the presser foot, because I'm going to sew a zigzag stitch and I want the needle to go off and on of the fabric. So what it's going to do is just going to capture that edge and kind of wrap around the edge and secure it so that it doesn't fray. So of course I'm going to start with my reinforcement stitch, my back stitch, and then I'm going to set it to a zigzag stitch where the stitches are close together, and then just start sewing. And so I've stitched all the way to the end, and there you have it. A nice, perfect strap. And I hardly had to do anything to this. That's the beauty of upcycling. A lot of the things that you need are pretty much ready-made for you. This is one of my favorite things to use for straps for clothing. So here you go. Okay, another one of my favorite things to use to make sleeves when I'm upcycling clothing is cuffs from men's shirt sleeves. I have a lot of these because I make a lot of things out of men's button-down shirts, and I use the sleeves a lot to make different things. So I have a lot of cuffs. So I like to use these whenever I can, and they come in handy for lots of other things too. I will be doing a video on how to make a little purse out of these. So you want to make sure that you subscribe so that you can see that. So this is really simple. Basically all you're going to do is attach these cuffs end to end and sew them together. Depending on how long you want your strap, you may just need 2 cuffs, maybe 2.5, which you can just cut 1 in half. And sometimes if the cuffs, like if you have 2 cuffs that are both from left sleeves or both of them are from right sleeves, then you can actually button it together, and it's cute. You still want to make sure that you sew it so that it's secure. And then as you can see on this end, I have 2 buttonholes that match up, so I'll just sew that, overlap it and sew it. And then it may be a situation where you have 2 ends that both have buttons on them. And what I usually do in that situation is, just so that I have enough room to overlap and I'm not sewing over the button, I use a box cutter, and I just slide that under there carefully, and the button just pops right off. And just overlap it as much as you want and sew it. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so I've sewn these 2 cuffs together, giving me a long strap, and I just used a straight stitch and then I went over it again with a zigzag stitch. So I'm going to flip it over, and I have this excess here, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut that away. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce this edge. This is the cut edge that was cut off of the sleeve. So I'm just going to sew a zigzag stitch over that, just as I did with the first strap that I showed you that I had cut off of the short sleeve. I'm going to do the same thing with this. So I'm going to start out with my reinforcement stitch and then do a zigzag stitch. Okay, there you go. So I've done my stitching on the edge so it's nice and secure, and that will keep it from fraying. So there's a strap ready to be attached to a garment. Very easy. Okay, so the third upcycling method that I use for making straps is the easiest one of all, and that is simply just using pretty much ready-made straps from like belts and sashes that you have collected from old garments. Maybe you have some things that you're going to take to the thrift store, something that has a sash or a fabric belt attached to it, and you've saved the belt. Or maybe you've bought something that you're going to cut up and recycle, but you're not going to use the belt. Save those pieces because they come in very handy for making straps. Like this is a piece, I already have it cut for straps, but it was just a long belt for a dress. Here's another long belt that I have taken from a dress, and I will be using it, I'm sure, for straps. And these are actually strings that have come out of pajama bottoms, drawstring pajama bottoms, and they are great for making spaghetti straps. Spaghetti straps are not that easy to make because they're so tiny. So I love recycling these and using these. So all you have to do with these is simply cut them to the right length and sew them on. So that is a handy little trick. Okay, so maybe you don't do a lot of upcycling, or maybe you've just gotten started into upcycling and you don't have a lot of shirt sleeves or shirt cuffs laying around, or belts laying around to use. If that's the case, then you will need to create your own strap. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is make sure that the fabric that you're using for your strap is ironed and nice and smooth. And then you're going to cut it to the right size. Now this is a pretty short piece of fabric, and I'm just using this as an example. So of course you want to make sure that your fabric is long enough for the length of your strap, and you want to allow more length for sewing. So however long you want your strap, you need to make sure that there's extra length on the ends to sew onto your garment. So this particular strap, I'm going to make it about 1.5 inches wide, which means I need to cut it just a little over 3 inches wide, because when I fold it, of course, it's going to be more narrow. So I'm going to use my rotary cutter and my cutting board, and I'm just going to lay this out here and use my yardstick, laying my yardstick on the line right up against, right up against this line here. And then I'm just going to cut along here and remove that piece. And then I'm going to go over here to this line. This is about 3 inches, so my strap, when I fold it in half, it's going to be a little less than 1.5 inches wide. Okay, so now I have my strap cut to the width that I want it. So the next step is just to fold this in half. Now you want to make sure that when you're folding it, that your design, the pattern of your fabric is on the inside. So this is the right side of my fabric, and this is the wrong side of my fabric. So I'm going to make sure that the right side of my fabric with the design on it is on the inside. So I'm going to fold that in half, and then I'm just going to iron it. Okay, so now I have my fabric folded and ironed, so I'm ready to pin it for sewing. So I'm going to sew about 1/4 inch. I'm going to probably about 1/4 inch away from the edge. So I want to place my pins at about that line. So now I'm ready to sew, and I'm going to be sewing in this direction. Okay, I'm ready to sew my strap. As always, you want to make sure that your machine is set to the correct settings, and always make sure that you start your sewing with a back stitch for reinforcement. And I have decided I have my fabric lined up with a 3/8 inch line. So my seam allowance is going to be 3/8 of an inch. I'm just going to remove my pins as I go. And then another back stitch at the end. Okay, so my strap is sewn together and it's ready to be turned right side out. So what I'm going to do, now you can do this with your fingers, but it's complicated if depending on how narrow your strap is. Oh, one thing I want to mention too is the seam allowance. If you get it too wide, then it is harder to turn the strap because then the seam allowance gets all bunched up inside there. So that's why it's important to have a narrow seam allowance. So the trick that I like to use is a long, large safety pin, and I'm going to pin it to the fold. I'm just pinning it right in the fold, and then I'm going to slide it inside there, and then just keep sliding, and it's going to pull that end inside as I slide the pin. It just pulls that end with it. So I just keep doing that, but I'm gathering it up and sliding it along. And then when I get to the other side, There's the pin on the other side. I gently, you don't want to pull too hard because you don't want to rip your fabric. So I just pull that out and take my pin out. And there I have my strap. But now I need to press it so that it's nice and flat. So I'm going to do that next. Okay, so now I'm ready to press my strap so that it's nice and flat. So I'm going to make sure that the seam is not folded in too much. You want to bring that out as much as you can so that your strap is as wide as it is supposed to be. So as you're sewing, just kind of take your fingers and pull that seam out so that it's not folded too much, because it will naturally want to fold in because of the way it was sewn. So you kind of have to work with it. You can turn it over and just do the other side just to make sure. Make sure it looks nice on both sides. And there you have it. I hope these tips have helped you with your upcycled sewing or your sewing in general. I will be posting more tutorials, so make sure you click the subscribe button and the bell so that you don't miss out.